I'm Reisigo and I'm attempting to complete every single GameCube game, but I'm randomizing what game I'm playing next. In this episode, we're looking at the second story mode, Babylon, in Sonic Riders. I want to start by saying thank you so much for the support on the first episode. We hit our like goal, so now we're going to go through the other story. If you didn't watch the first part and want to check that one out, I'll link that video in the description to this one. Just as a refresher, Sonic Riders was released on February 21st, 2006, and was developed by the Sonic team and published by Sega. In this look at Sonic Riders, we're going to go through the Babylon story and see what they were doing while we were playing as Sonic and friends in the Hero campaign. Our first cutscene for this story is Jet, Wave, and Storm on their airship. We find out that he got a bunch of stuff from his father, but on his desk is a cube. It looks almost see-through, and Storm asks Jet what it is. Before Jet can answer, Storm figures out what it is. This is the Babylon key that is supposed to be the key to unlocking access to the Babylon Garden and finding out what their ancestors left behind for them to discover. Then they realize that Dr. Eggman was there to see Jet, and by this point Eggman has found his way into the room with them. He asks Jet if he has the Babylon key. Jet tells him no, and then Eggman whispers to Jet that he only needs to collect 8 Chaos Emeralds and they can activate the key. Jet tells him that it won't be a problem for the rogues, and then Eggman tells him about Sonic and how he could be a problem. Jet then goes on to say that Sonic might be the fastest creature on the ground, but he's the fastest in the air, using his extreme gear. Then he has the worst possible laugh ever. It's super bad. This leads to the first mission of the game. We have to beat Sonic in the first race. We have to get first place overall, but we have to beat Sonic, that's the objective. This takes us to our first course called Night Chase, and this course is basically a large futuristic city with a bunch of advertisements on everything. There are hover cars on the roads, and it just feels like a futuristic Las Vegas. Is this the way of the future? If you watch part 1, you'll notice that this is the first level of the Heroes campaign, but we do that one during the day. Anyways, the layout of this course hasn't changed, but we get to use Jet now. Jet is a speed character and has the ability to grind. In Sonic Riders, there are 3 types of racers. The first one is speed, then flying, and the last one is power. Each one of these types have their own advantages and disadvantages when playing through the game. The speed type, in my opinion, being the best of the 3, they're able to grind and take shortcuts that make this game so much easier. The flying type is the one I struggle with the most, and the power one isn't used all that much in the campaigns, but seems to be pretty decent when I played as those characters. Since I played the other campaign first, and I actually learned how to play the game, this race was pretty simple, and I finished this race on my first try. I had a few scary moments, like when I hit a cop car, when I ran out of boost and had to run and hit a massive jump from my feet. I don't think this would have worked, but I wasn't complaining, and I won by around 2 seconds. Making Sonic look like a chump in the process. Next we get a cutscene where Sonic and his friends are on this wooden bridge, by a waterfall for some reason, and they're talking about Sonic's gear that Tails has been working on. Wave shows up and checks out the hoverboard. With her internal thoughts, she talks about how the board isn't half bad for an amateur working on it. And then in front of Sonic and all of his friends, she's somehow able to place an explosive to the bottom of his board. I have no idea how no one noticed this. She gives it back to Tails and calls the board a piece of junk. Then, for no reason, we get a line from Amy where she's mad and wants to know who Wave thinks she is, and that gives us our next mission objective. We have to use Wave and beat Amy in a race. We have to get first place in this race too. I'll be going over the races somewhat quick and focusing on the story moments, but I'll talk about each race a bit and anything I want to highlight. This race takes place on Red Canyon, and I had so many issues with this one. The flying type characters are so hard for me to use. Just so you know, this was like my 10th try when I finally got first place on this one. If you know this game or watched part 1 of Sonic Riders, these are all courses that we did in the Heroes story and are just slightly changed in some way or another. Usually this is just by changing the time of day or changing one element to another. This one takes place at dusk during this story, but previously we raced this one during the day. That's true for most courses, so I wanted to just point it out here and not bring them up every single time we get a new race. I had to eventually get better at racing with Wave though, because this course is no joke. If you make a big mistake, it's very hard to catch back up. I love all the water sections. and the boosters that we can fly through when we're in the cave section, but it was just challenging for me. For all the Sonic Riders fans out there, is there a technique for using flying type characters to make them better? I'm generally curious. Anyways, we're able to win this race on this attempt and even finished almost 2 seconds ahead of Amy. We get another cutscene where Storm charges into the office on the Rogue's airship, and he tells Jet that he lost his race against the red guy. He then tries to blame his gear. Wave doesn't like that and tells him it's his skills and that he just sucks. Jet tells him to stop fighting and gives Storm the task of sneaking into Dr. Eggman's base and figuring out what he's hiding from them. Jet also tells him that if he doesn't find anything, then he shouldn't bother coming back. Storm runs out and causes a photo on the wall to fall and land on Jet. He has the worst luck with the other 2 members of his crew. Then we get our next objective. Using Storm, we have to beat Eggman's robots. They are racing after us, trying to capture us, so we have to finish first place in this one. This one takes place on a level called Ice Factory, and if you remember in the other campaign, this was all fire instead. It's the same course from what I can tell, besides it being ice. This is actually one of the easier stages in this one, because we're not competing against another real racer, and we're just playing against some standard robots that aren't very good. I felt like I was always living on the edge with this race, and I had a bunch of times where I was running on foot because I ran out of boost. But I was able to win this one without much problem. I think after playing the game as long as I had at this point, I was starting to get better at the game, and I was actually able to figure out how to take turns instead of just hitting the wall all the time. This is one of the better tracks, I think, and everything flows well. Look how close this race ended up being, though. I won this race by 0.01 seconds. That's what I would call a photo finish in this game. You can't get any closer than that. Like, it's not possible. After winning that race, we get another cutscene. This cutscene is a bit pointless. Wave comes to the forest where Jet is just relaxing, and she's worried about Storm. She tells Jet that he's the leader and he needs to care more. He then blocks her out, and we get that fast forward noise that games use sometimes. And it just shows that Jet finds her annoying and that he isn't listening. He sees Sonic practicing and he leaves her there while she's still talking. She finally notices and questions why she even bothers, then says if she wants anything done, she's going to have to do it herself. Then she grabs her gear and walks off. We have to get first place again in this next race, and we get to use Jet for this one. The stage that this mission takes place on is called White Cave. This is the forest level from the other story, but this time it looks a little more dark and scary. I always love using the speed characters, so this should be another fun one. We're not racing anyone besides robots in this, so we don't have to worry about any characters with special abilities or anything. I haven't mentioned this yet, but when collecting rings during the race, we can increase our boost skill level. This increases our overall stats with the character we're using, and this helps me out because our boost meter is larger, and I'm not always running low on boost power like I am in all the other races so far. This one ended up being really easy, and I won this race by over 4 seconds. The best that we've done up to this point in the campaign. Since we won this race, we get another cutscene right away. This cutscene is very long, and there is very little information given. Storm finally returns with a chip that has one of Dr. Eggman's diary entries. Wave uploads this chip to her equipment. We find out that he tricked them all into believing that the Babylonian treasure is a gem, and it's actually the technology that the Babylon ancestors had and used. He goes on to tell a story about how someone got a wing from them and was able to take over the world. Jet doesn't seem to care about this at all, but Wave convinces him that it could have a bunch of value, even more than silver or gold. Jet then daydreams about being in a pile of gold, and then he's interrupted by a beeping noise, signaling the next race. Our goal for the race is to win the World Grand Prix, which is just a fancy way to tell us to get first place again. This seems to be the goal for all these races in this story, a bit different from the Heroes campaign. Anyways, we're heading into the last race of the Grand Prix, and this takes place on a stage called Dark Desert. A desert track with a bunch of turns inside of runes, and we have to race the best of the best. We get to use Jet again, and we have to face off against Sonic, Tails, and Knuckles. I'm not sure how they all qualified for this race, but here we are. The area that we restore our boost meter has us spinning around in a green ball of energy, and this is actually really cool looking. I like this course a lot. This race has a bunch of places to trick, so we can restore our boost meter pretty much anywhere. But this also means that we need to always have it or we're going to lose the race. And I won't lie, this one took me a bunch of attempts to win. I ended up just making some bad decisions, or I would just mess up while racing and lose right at the end. But I finally got a good run where I basically stayed in the front of the pack most of the race, and I finally finished ahead of everyone. I knew it was only a matter of time before I would get it, but it took me a handful of attempts to get there. I was able to beat Sonic by 0.41 seconds though, so it wasn't like I broke away from them or anything like that. Once we complete the race, we find out that the Babylon Garden ended up coming out of the ground. If you want to know more about how this happened, check out the other part for this game. But we get a cutscene where Storm, Wave, Knuckles, and Tails are at the Babylon Garden and are about to fight when a bunch of Dr. Eggman's robots end up attacking them. We need to escape, and our next race is doing that. We have to get away from them, but we also need to finish in first place. The next race takes place on a stage called Sky Road, which is just a part of Babylon Garden. This course is very good. It has branching paths that are suited for each type of character. Some paths require us to grind rails, so we need to use a speed type. Some have jumps that lead to boosters that we need to fly through, which means we have to use the flying type. And some paths require us to break stones to get through. These ones require us to have a power type character. This is my favorite course in the game and is always a bunch of fun. We have to use Wave in this race, meaning that I'm going to struggle with this one because of the flying type. After all this time, I still can't figure out how to use them effectively. So this took me a bunch of times to win. I was getting annoyed in this race because it made it so much more difficult using her. Where if I was using Storm, I think I would have won in 2 to 3 tries. On the attempt that we won this race, we beat second place by over 3 seconds. And the main characters weren't even close to me during this race. I had a really good run, and my second lap only took 45 seconds. I was in a groove for that one. Our average lap for this race is typically around a minute. After this race, we get another cutscene. In this one, we get the other side of the cutscene at the end of the hero story. And the Babylon rogues open the door to get inside the Babylon Garden. Once inside, they awaken something, and Sonic senses it. They sneak inside during the scene and they meet up with the Babylon rogues. We then come face to face with what looks like a giant genie, but they just call it the Guardian. He calls us greedy, and then we have to defeat him for the final mission of the game. This is a boss fight, and we actually need to hit him during this race. But once we do, we still need to win the race in order to beat the mission. This race takes place on a course called Babylon Guardian. This race is a perfect oval in a scary graveyard-looking area. We get to use Sonic for this mission, which is nice since we've been using the Babylon Rogues for the entire campaign. The idea for this race is to catch up to the Guardian and bump into him. This will take one of his 3 hearts away, and then he changes the track completely, and we're racing in a dark corridor that has little lights throughout it. There isn't much detail when he changes it, but when we finish the lap, it goes back to normal. Then we have to wash and repeat this 3 times in standard boss fashion to finish the mission. This race isn't that bad, and I was able to beat this one on my first attempt. I was honestly shocked how good I did during this mission. Grinding in this one is our best friend and allows us to restore our boost. That boost is essential if we want to catch up to the boss. We ended up doing this in 1 try, as I mentioned before, and we also were able to beat all the other racers, including Storm that was almost 2 full seconds behind us at the end. I want to pat myself on the back for this one. We get another cutscene where the Guardian turns into a treasure chest, and when Sonic and Jet open it up, Dr. Eggman sneaks up behind him and tells him to hand it over. He has a gun pointing at him, and he says, "Hey, give me the treasure that's inside." Once the treasure is handed over, it's just a magic flying carpet. He doesn't know that though, because it's just a carpet at that point. He's not happy with what it is, and he calls it a piece of junk. He even passes out because of how useless he thinks it is. We find out that it's actually a piece of prototype extreme gear that we needed the Babylon key to activate. Jet uses the key on it and it allows it to fly. Then we get the last cutscene of the game. It has Sonic and Jet as friendly rivals now, and they're going to leave the Babylon Garden floating in the air. Both teams decide to split from the desert and they get on their extreme gear and race off. Them leaving ends the game once and for all. This cutscene looks so much better than all the other ones too. This is like high quality cutscene. The credits roll and the game is finally over. I really enjoyed going through the other campaign for this game, and I'm glad that it added more context to the story. But that's it for Sonic Riders. I want to thank everyone for the support that we got on the other video. We were able to smash our like goal so that we could go through the Babylon story. That really means a lot to me. If you made it to this point in the video, remember to subscribe to the channel because it really helps me out. Like and share so we can get more eyes on this challenge, and as always, we'll see you in the next one.